Good afternoon. Welcome back to another episode of Politics for the Culture. I'm your host, Senator Dwight Bullard. As we've been doing this new season, got to make sure you peep the pen. Peep the pen. We're going with a different lapel pin based on the show. Going with Black Boy Joy today because, like most Black boys, hate the stereotype, but we all used to have hoop dreams, especially if you came up in the 80s and 90s, like I did when folks like Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, we're dominating the paint in basketball. And so we're celebrating Black Boy Joy today. As you know, Politics for the Culture aims to talk about politics in a different way. And this show is going to be dedicated, of course, to politics of sports. We understand the interconnection between politics and sports too often, but as of recent, we've been hearing a lot about three particular letters, NIL, right? That goes with the other four letters that we oftentimes hear associated with NIL, NCAA, right? And so we think about NIL deals, which means names, image, likeness, deals that are kind of dominating intercollegiate sports. We're seeing that players, athletes, student athletes are making, in many cases, millions of dollars for themselves through these deals. Multiple companies using them as amateur spokespeople, training them in preparation for hopefully larger deals when they decide to turn pro. So today I have the benefit of somebody who I've known now for 30 plus years, somebody I've called a friend, but one of my closest friends, who happens to be one of the first people that I was definitely in awe of as a student athlete, someone who's gone through the high school ranks, played college ball, who's a real student of the game, but now is passing on that knowledge to a whole future generation of up-and-coming student athletes. So I want to welcome a friend of mine, now friends of the show, Brian Coates. Welcome to Politics for the Culture, Brian.
Hey, Dwight, I appreciate it, man. Glad to be on here. We've talked about it for a while. Glad we were finally able to make it happen.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we want to go ahead and jump right into it, right? And so as I mentioned in kind of the initial welcome you to the show, you've seen this from its infancy, right? Going back to the days when you were a high school athlete, going through the perils of college recruitment, you know, the ins and outs of that, the ups and downs. Now we see that this has become a multi-billion-dollar industry in terms of intercollegiate sports. Now, kind of, when we talk about college athletes being kind of manipulated by the system, the NCAA being a multi-billion-dollar so-called nonprofit that has basically made that money off of these student athletes. We talk about this notion of NIL, or name, image, likeness deals, allowing access for those folks to make a little money for themselves. We're going to talk about the NCAA and some of those problems on the back end, but now that you're in this business of developing these athletes, what do you think is the impact for those, you know, players that you've been working with? What has NIL meant for them, for these kids who, you know, been getting out the mud, maybe came up hard, you know, not necessarily coming from the best conditions, now having access to money before they, you know, in many cases, even set foot on the court? How's that been a game changer from what you've seen and experienced yourself to what you're seeing with these new brand of athletes?
Yeah, that's a great way to kind of summarize everything. But it's changed in a way because, you know, before the goal was to get to the pros. You know, you wanted to be a professional athlete, you wanted to be the top dog, and you felt like that's where the big money was. So college was kind of like that transition phase for you. You go to college, you do your thing there, and then the big money comes. But now I'm seeing that, you know, a lot of kids are focused more on the NIL stuff, and they're like worried about that money and how much they can get in that regard. You know, before they even get out of high school, they're already talking about, like, you know, what schools are paying the most NIL, and they're paying attention to it too. They're watching, you know, the blogs, they're looking at Instagram, they're looking at all of the social media, and they're seeing the numbers that are being thrown around and the focus has changed now. Like, and it's tough in a way, Dwight, because the kids kind of lose focus. You know what I mean? Because yeah, the NIL money can be large, but in the grander scheme of things, the pro money is so much more. So sometimes the kids lose sight of the bigger picture and they start focusing more on the NIL, which kind of like, as me as a coach, I have to also kind of help them with their mindset to stay focused on the bigger goal and not focus on the short term.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you touched on that. So you're out here trying to develop these folks, and just so folks can fully appreciate the work that Brian does is kind of helping student athletes in kind of the subsidiary space, right? You're helping to develop their skills beyond that of the actual college coach. You're trying to give them really kind of fundamentals. So you touched on it a little bit. When you have a social media driven market where kids are trying to get followers and likes for things outside of basketball, maybe that have a little bit to do with basketball, but not as much. How do you remind them that it is about the long term, that it is about the skill development, that it's not so much about the fact that you have, thousands of followers and millions of followers, but the fact that you need this jump shot, or you need to play defense, or you need to make sure you're protecting the ball? How do you keep them focused on developing those skills?
It's hard because the kids, they're so focused on it that you just have to hammer home the point. And I always say the main thing is the main thing. You know what I mean? Like, if without the basketball part is what is bringing the attention to you. So you have to, stay focused on focused on the game, focus on your development, focus on, developing your IQ as well when it comes to the sport that you're playing. And then it's really easy to kind of remind them of it when you start seeing the NBA deals that are being thrown around. Like Jaylen Brown just signed for like $300 million. And, Damian Lillard has like a $200-something million contract. These guys are making $50-60 million a year. So that's one of the things I also use. I'm like, okay, yeah, you go to college, say you get maybe you get $1 million, in NIL when you go to college. But, that's solid money. But that NBA money is generational wealth. You know what I mean? And so you got to keep them focused on like, hey, the basketball is going to bring everything to you. So keep the main thing. Let's stay focused on what we're doing. Let's keep developing. And yeah, the NIL is part of it, but the main goal is to get that generational wealth and get that max contract in the NBA. That's the main goal. Take care of your kids' and your grandkids' kids. That's what you're looking for.
So I'm glad you brought the NBA, because you've been working with both male and female athletes when it comes to the basketball thing. So recently I was seeing an interview with Angel Reese, and she talked about the fact that she's now become so popular at LSU that she's now taking online classes because of the hoopla around her popularity that kind of exploded after this year's Final Four, where LSU won the championship. So we know that there's big money in the NBA in terms of men's basketball, but for women or for female athletes that are also kind of trying to navigate these waters, those NIL bills in many cases may exceed what they could make in the WNBA. So as you're training these female athletes, how are you navigating those waters in terms of helping them, balance that reality out, that they could, for them, the generational wealth might actually be in the 4 years they spend in college versus that of the longer term deal they may get in the WNBA. So how do you kind of balance that out with the women athletes that you're training?
Yeah, you're right, Dwight. It's totally different on the women's side because the money is different. The WNBA doesn't pay as much as the NBA, as we all know. So you can look at in the women's college game is so popular right now. The girls are building their brands earlier. They're being household names earlier, like a Paige Beckers, Angel Reese. Like, we knew these girls are household names before they get on campus. And so when they get to campus, that's where the popularity skyrockets. And that's one of the sad things about the WNBA, not to kind of go off on a tangent, but that's one of the sad parts about the WNBA, because there's not enough teams. There's not a lot of roster spots. So a lot of the girls that we see that are superstars in college and building their brand in college, when they get to the WNBA, a lot of those first round picks are getting cut. And so the WNBA isn't a strong option sometimes for a lot of these girls, unless you're one of the top 5 in the draft. You know what I mean? So my goal with my female athletes is to really get them focused on building their brand early, and, getting your social media right. Obviously we building the skill level and stuff, but you got to market yourself and build your brand so that when you get to college, you can take advantage of that NIL when you get there. So it's really about like, hey, we got to maximize the time that we have in college, because most guys they're one and done, 2 years max sometimes, and then they're getting out of college. The college girls are staying there 4 years. So you got to really maximize your potential and do all that you can, try to get what you can while you're in there in school for those 4 years.
100%. Now we know that the NCAA is still making billions and billions of dollars. History will tell the tale of the O'Bannon brothers. Shout out to the brothers who, we came up around the same time we did. Yep. But it was Ed O'Bannon and Charles O'Bannon who really brought this to the forefront around name, image, and likeness when they saw themselves depicted in these NCAA video games back in the day, received no compensation, the Fab Five, Chris Webber, Jalen Rose, and those guys that kind of noticed the fact that, as their popularity was becoming much, much bigger, they saw that the schools that they were going to, the NCAA as a whole, were making, millions, if not billions of dollars off of their images and likenesses, selling their jerseys, etc. Right? So we know that to be the case. So let's not let the NCAA off the hook as much. No. The provocative question I got to ask is, do you think at this point, irrespective of the fact that the NIL money is out there, do you think the NCAA still needs to kick in resources back to the pockets of those athletes that are playing on these teams? I guess the question still becomes, should they be offering some sort of stipend, some sort of money or give back to these student athletes, especially considering not every athlete gets an NIL deal in this new emerging market?
You hit the nail right on the head, Dwight. Everybody's not getting NIL. You know what I mean? Like and even if you're not getting NIL, you're still making the sacrifices as a student athlete to go to practice, to do the workouts, to go to film sessions and still go to class and be a student and still try to have a personal life and all of that. So I've always felt like the NCAA should give some kind of stipend to all of the players that are on the team, because like I said, you got 15 players, roster spots on a basketball team. And out of that 15, maybe 3, 4, maybe at the most, we probably have 5 guys getting NIL, with 2 being big time NIL guys. You know what I mean? Where you're talking about the $1 million guys. Then the other guys are getting, maybe the 50 grand, 100 grand. Yeah, that's a lot of money, but still, you got the other, 10 guys on the team who aren't getting any NIL or very basic NIL. And so those guys, there needs to be something involved for them as well, because they're contributing to the team, they're contributing to the wins, they're contributing to the money that's being generated on campus. So I've always felt like the NCAA needs to step in and provide a stipend for those guys on the team, because they're also making the sacrifice, and they're not getting the NIL because they're not the superstars. But those student athletes also deserve their piece of the pie as well.
So, we're still talking basketball. I know you're a student of the game. You love the game. Recently saw an interview with Rick Barry, the great Rick Barry, University of Miami Hall of Famer, who gave an interesting point. And although I thought about this, the point that he made, he really did kind of make it clear. and he was basically being asked, there's always the comparison between new school players and old school players. Who would have been better in trying to do these kinds of comparisons. The point he raised was, now that basketball has all this money floating around, which also means that you have these therapists, these hot and cold tubs, these, multi-billion, $1 million facilities are helping the things. And the point he raised was, he was like, when we were coming up in the NBA, we were driving ourselves to games sometimes. Like, we had to rent cars. We didn't have any flights that were being thing. And he's like, and he kind of ended on the note that if you put the skill set of those old school players in the modern context with all the things, all the, extras, all the benefits that these new players have, that he's like, the real comparison is the fact that we would have definitely washed these players because we had the skills, but we didn't have the benefit of all the other things that they have now. So he's like, you put a George Gervin, you put an Oscar Robertson, you put a Wilt Chamberlain, you put even a classic Kareem in the same spaces with all this benefits, all the, and we're not even talking about the load management stuff, right? You just put them in that space right now. He's like, no comparison. The question in all that is like, how do you feel about Rick Barry kind of making that statement? Because for me, when I walked away from it, I was like, you might have a valid point, Rick. And so love to get your opinion on that.
I hate how the current generation just poops on the old generation. Like, they're always talking about how these guys aren't athletic and they're not this and they're not that. But how they used to play the game kind of one-handed and things like that. But the game evolves. It always evolves. It always changes. So even if you go back to when I came out in, mid to late 90s, the game has changed so much since then. Technology has changed since then. Like, there's moves, and I didn't have a trainer, dude. I didn't have no trainer. I had my dad taking me to the park and him and my older brother beating me up at the park. And that's how I learned how to play basketball. But I didn't have my daughter, she trains 3-4 times a week, dude, with two different trainers. Like, I have a trainer that works with her on her handles and her shooting. And then I have another trainer who works with her on her handles and her counters and things like that, and her pull-up game and stuff. So we didn't have that, man. And so when I think about what Rick Barry was talking about, think about like just the technology and the shoes that we wear now. Think about that, Bullard. Like, the shoes that people wear, the shoes that they wore back then, there was no Zoom Air in the shoes and things like that. And you weren't getting tons of pairs of different shoes to wear for all of your games and the charter flights and the hot and cold. Like, real talk, dude. Like, one of my players that I work with, he was one of the top transfers in the country. And so I was fortunate enough to sit on a lot of his recruiting calls. And when I looked at the facilities of some of these Power 5 schools, it's unreal, dude. Like, just the technology and the advances in nutrition and the weight rooms that these people had at their facilities, the indoor track facilities and things to kind of get you conditioned. Strength and conditioning coaches, we did not have that. So if you think about take a Rick Barry, who was one of the greatest shooters and scorers of his day, one of the most skilled players, and you put him in today's era with the training, the strength and conditioning, the nutrition that they have now, the charter flights, the training that you have now. Like, every NBA team has player development guys who will stay with you after practice. You'll have 2-3 guys to rebound for you when you're shooting your shots after practice. You know what I mean? Like, all of that makes a huge difference. So I have no doubts in my mind that the generational guys of that era, such as a Oscar Robertson, such as a Wilt Chamberlain, George Gervin, those guys that you mentioned earlier, I have no doubt in my mind that those guys will be extremely successful in today's game, especially because it's less physical, it's more wide open. There's no centers in the game now to protect the paint. Like, oh my God. I feel like those old school guys would go nuts in today's game, man, with the advances of technology and everything else. So I'm in 100% agreement with my man Rick Barry, even though I know he's a little brash and people don't really like him because he has strong opinions. But on this one, I agree with him wholeheartedly.
I feel that. So this is politics for the culture. So we always got to add a little culture and flavor to it. And so we know that basketball has led really to this birth of shoe culture or sneaker culture that we see. And we know that, a guy by the name of Michael Jordan has dominated shoe culture for a long time. So kind of taking Jordan's aside altogether, shoes beyond Jordan. When we think about, iconic shoes beyond the existence of the Jordan brand and the convergence of hip hop with that, would love to kind of get your thought on maybe what are your top 3 non-Jordan all-time basketball shoes when you think about it. And feel free to be as specific or as vague as you need. Would love folks to kind of appreciate where you're coming from.
Man, listen, like I was a big fan of the Fab Five. So those black Charles Barkleys that they wore in 93, the 93 Final Four, man, when I became an adult and I had my own money and they put those shoes back out, the first retros that they ever did, I bought those shoes. That's my favorite non-Jordan shoe of all time. Like the Charles Barkleys from his MVP season, 92, 93. We all call them the Fab Fives. If you say the Fab Five Barkleys, everybody knows which ones those are with the strap going across. That's the hardest shoe ever, dude. Like non-Jordan, that's the hardest shoe. Now, second are it's another Fab Five shoe that they wore that they made really popular with the Air Huaraches. The Air Huaraches from their freshman year, those go hard as well. I have a pair of those retro in my closet as well. Had to go back and get those. And then I'm gonna go kind of new school with the third one because I don't really hoop like that anymore, but my daughter does. Shout out to my baby girl Charlize. But her favorite shoe has been the Kyrie's. She loves the Kyrie series. It's a great fit for her, and then the color schemes and the colorways have been outstanding. They're a little too flat for me to play in, but for her, she loves them and she rocks with those. And then an honorable mention to the Kobe's. The Kobe line, especially the revamped Kobe's, like when they bring those back out, the retro Kobe's, when they bring the old Kobe's and put the new technology in those have been amazing. So that's an honorable mention for those. But yeah, my top 3 are the Fab Five Barkleys, the Air Huaraches from the 90s, the Kyrie's, kind of the new school stuff, and then the revamped Kobe's that are coming out. So I love those 4 right there.
So we're gonna close out on talking about the Bean, Kobe Bean Bryant a little bit in this regard, that we always hear about ballers wanting to be rappers. But as we ask this question, which rapper do you think is the best baller?
Ooh, man, I gotta go with Cole, man. I gotta go with J. Cole, man. I'm seeing him in the runs in the Black Hawk runs in New York, and he's out there getting it, man. So I feel like he's the best rapper / hooper out there right now. It's got to be J. Cole in my opinion.
Shout out to J. Cole in North Carolina. We appreciate that. And I appreciate you, B. Coach, for joining us on Politics for the Culture. I think this was an informative episode. Definitely look out for Brian. In terms of your training, where can folks find you on social media?
It's a Camp Coach 20 on Instagram. That's my training / media page because I film. I'm a videographer as well, so I film sports. I've been doing that recently since I got my new camera to film my baby's games. So I started doing that as well. So Camp Coach 20, CAMPCOATS 20. That's the Instagram page.
Appreciate you again, Brian Coates will be on the show. Hope to have you back on Politics for the Culture. Once again, Politics for the Culture aims to have conversations about things that aren't just explicitly political. It's not about who's the president all the time or who's in Congress. It's about these issues that delve into politics, whether we like to think about it or not. Sports and politics have always found themselves intertwined, and we want to bring that conversation to you. Thanks again for being on Politics for the Culture. We'll catch you next time, another episode of Politics for the Culture. Have a good one, folks.